Now, this isn't the most important article I've ever read, but it does show something. It shows you that even women who are very capable at what they do, as soon as the shit hits the fan, they will look for a man to blame. How Elizabeth Holmes' abuse allegations could impact her criminal trial. She's on trial for fraud, multiple counts of fraud. And she's going to try and put abuse allegations to say that, hey, I didn't know what I was doing. Now, for months, jurors at Elizabeth Holmes' criminal trial have heard one witness after another speak about the confident and charismatic former CEO of Theranos. Witnesses testified about how she convinced investors to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into her failed blood testing startup. She attracted a star-studded roster of board members and negotiated a key retail partnership on her own without a lawyer present. So I agree with this. This woman is a talented person, right? But this week, a tearful Holmes sat on witness stand and delivered a stunningly different perspective on her time running the company. It's not stunning to me. Behind the scenes, Holmes alleges she was in the midst of a decade-long abusive relationship with Theranos Chief Operating Officer and President Ramesh Sunny Balwani, who she said tried to control nearly every aspect of her life. So all her accomplishments don't count now because he was controlling her from behind the scenes all the way. Is this what this woman going to admit? I bet there'll be some mental gymnastics over that. The allegations from Holmes, who was one of the only few witnesses expected to be called to testify by her defense team, was easily the most emotionally charged moment of her 5 days on the stand so far. Her claim, which Balwani's attorneys have previously denied, could also complicate the government's case against her in the eyes of the jury. This strategy, by the way, could not work for Balwani. It could not work in the reverse. Balwani couldn't blame Holmes saying she controlled every aspect of his life. So for them to even allow this is, an act of sexism to me. The government alleges Holmes knowingly misled investors, doctors, and patients about the capabilities of her company's blood testing technology. Through a web of alleged deception in pursuit of money, Holmes faces 9 accounts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and up to 20 years in prison if convicted. Holy cow, that is strong punishment. By the way, I like it though, because everyone knows that white collar crime gets the velvet gloves next to blue collar crime, even though, as you can see, white collar crime steals way much more money. She has pleaded not guilty. Wow. She's not guilty of this because some guy abused her. Her abuse claim potentially raises new questions for jurors about her intent to mislead. Not to this guy. I wouldn't be fooled by this. If I was a judge, I wouldn't be allowing this. A key factor to the jury of 8 men, and 4 women will weigh when determining her fate. If I was a juror there, I wouldn't be weighing this at all. I'd just be tossing this to the side. Indeed, just before the jury selection got underway, the court unsealed the documents, which detailed that Holmes may claim she was abused by Balwani as evidence that she lacked the intent to deceive. See, Balwani was just telling her what to do the whole time. Potential jurors were also previously asked whether they had any experience with interpersonal abuse or violence, or in an effort to weed out those who might be biased. That's a good plan. It may make jurors second guess whether she was intentionally committing a fraud. Wouldn't make me second guess, said Lori Levison, the professor at Loyola Law School. I'm sorry for simple word, and former federal prosecutor. Some jurors, however, might be skeptical of her testimony. Some should be all. This case is very much about who is Elizabeth Holmes and how opportunistic she is. And she'll say whatever the moment requires her to say. Well, yeah. Okay. Holmes first met Balwani after graduating high school when she was just 18. He was 38. This is so typical. Like, don't get me wrong, this woman, of course, has shown great talent and skill. But the girls find these older guys with high status and use them as ladders to get what they want. An 18-year-old guy could not find a 38-year-old woman to give him a free ride this way. Holmes later dropped out of her. Oh, by the way, I've got a playlist called Girls Go for Status. And I'm tempted to put this in here because it just goes showing this teenage girl got graduated high school, found an older man to give her a boost. She didn't want to be around 18-year-old losers. Yeah, that's what the 18-year-old guys are to these girls. So she looked for a middle-aged man to give her a free ride. Holmes later dropped out of her sophomore year at Stanford to launch a business. A decision she testified was due in part to her having been raped while at school. Don't believe that whatsoever. Because if she was, I would have to say, where is the criminal? Is he behind bars? And I don't count young guys who've been forced out of university. If someone raped her, you go to the police. So sorry, I don't believe that at all. As she chose to pour herself into building a company, she said she sought business advice from Balwani. The relationship turned romantic. Of course it turned romantic. Because his business advice would have been very scant otherwise. I'm telling you guys right now, like I said, girls go for status. The male-female romantic relationship is one of prostitution. As she fought back tears, she testified Balwani controlled over her, ranged from forcing her to have sex with him to prescribing her with incredibly restrictive lifestyle. He had allegedly disciplined her eating, her voice, and her image. He also allegedly isolated her from others. How? Sorry, this is bullshit. This girl has shown nothing but independence. And she went after this guy. Sonny would get very upset if I was with my family because he said it was a distraction to the business, she testified on Monday. That could have been true. That may not have been controlling, though. If you are opening up a fresh business, you have to live and eat and breathe that business. So he could have just been hard-nosed. Notably, Holmes testified that Balwani didn't control her interactions with investors, journalists, retail executives, or board members. Rather, she testified he impacted everything I was about who I was, and I don't fully understand that. Okay, so in other words, this is the mental gymnastics I'm talking about. She wants to be able to say she was a talented young person who did this all on her own, but when she did her crimes, all of a sudden, some guy was pulling the strings. And of course, there's no details to this. He impacted everything about who I was. Only a woman would say that. This vague bullshit. Balwani, who was indicted alongside Holmes and will face the same charges when his trial begins next year, has also pleaded not guilty. Their trials were severed after Holmes indicated she may testify he was the victim of intimate partner abuse. Of course, they were severed because he realized This woman is going to throw me under the bus for the things she willingly did with me. According to Dr. Raven Stark, a forensic social worker, the nature of the relationship that Holmes has claimed has the hallmarks of what known as coercive control. I don't believe any of that, which is also the title of the book by Stark. Okay. Okay. The term refers to a pattern of abusive behavior that takes away a person's freedom. Notice men can never claim this, though, from women. Stark has consulted, if this Bawani tried that, they would just not allow this to be brought into the trial. They would just throw him away and throw away the key. Stark has consulted on cases, though not the Holmes case, with clinical psychologist Dr. Mindy Mechanic, who the defense indicated may call to testify as an expert in Holmes' trial. Mechanic, whose work focused on psychological consequences of violence, trauma, and victimization, evaluated Holmes for 14 hours. Wow. And also conducted interviews with her family members according to pretrial filings. Expert testimony will be helpful and appropriate in educating the jury as to the reasons for Mrs. Holmes' belief in the defense to and reliance on Mr. Bawani. The defense wrote one court filing. The government was also able to have an expert evaluate Holmes. I would say, sorry, there was no reason to evaluate this woman. She is responsible for the things she has done, because that's what they would be saying to the man. Stark said Holmes' abuse testimony is ultimately an appeal to the jury. Of course, it raises a question in the jury's mind about whether or not she was fully responsible for the activities. If she's not responsible, then you can say then she was just another blonde-headed bimbo that couldn't accomplish anything on her own. Dr. Ziv Cohen, a forensic psychiatrist and assistant professor, college, said it could also be an effective because it is kind of blurs what the trial is about. Yeah, that's what its purpose is. Well, it's not even, I disagree with that. It doesn't blur what the trial is about. It doesn't blur it. It just adds on. It says this woman is not responsible for her actions. That's it. It's no different than putting in, a crazy plea, for lack of a better term. Jessica Roth, professor at Cardozo Law School and former federal prosecutor, echoed the point. It could both be true that she was in an abusive relationship, as she alleges, and that she's guilty of the charges. That's true. I don't think the government has to disprove her allegations for it to prevail at trial. That's right. That's right. It is possible for both to be true, that this woman might have been in an abusive relationship, though I don't believe it. I have to allow the possibility, but also that she was still a woman who wanted to commit fraud and make easy money. Now, attempting to poke holes after bombshell testimony, at the very least, the abuse allegation potentially complicates the prosecutor's cross-examination of Holmes, introducing sensitivities. In questions on Holmes on Tuesday, Assistant Attorney Robert Leach sought to contrast Bawani's alleged control over her life with her power at the company she founded, led, in which she had 51% stake. This is important. This is an important thing of the whole thing. He was an at-will employee, Leach asked. He was, Holmes testified. Okay, you could fire him at any time, Leach continued. I could, Holmes replied. Do you see what's going on there? She's showing off that she was in charge. She could have fired this guy, and she probably had security at that building and she'd probably tell them to get rid of him if he was really abusive. This is another reason I don't believe this abuse case at all. Leach sought to discredit Holmes through pointing out that The rationale she had for a split between Bellani differed from prior testimony given to the Securities Exchange Commission. She told this SEC her relationship with Bellani lost its romantic luster at some point after they started working together. Well, it was always going to, all romantic relationships lose their luster eventually. But she probably didn't have any luster to start with. I mean, she latched on to this Bellani guy to get a leg up. Now, I'm not going to really read any more of this. I'll put it in the description box if you want to read it. That's fine. I don't think I need to go any further, because my point of this is always to show that these women, they rarely, there is no glass ceiling. They actually do succeed. They just much rarer. And two, that doesn't stop them from getting a boost from a man. And three, like I said, as soon as there are consequences from their actions, they find a man to blame. They find a man to blame. No, I think we will continue because there is something extra. Stark said, if the intent is to use text messages to discredit the nature of the relationship, Dr. Mechanic will tear it to shreds, because they're using text messages where there was still some, loving, sometimes loving and sometimes not. If she called to testify in defense, there's nothing inconsistent between loving men that hurt you. There you go. Okay. So she's trying to, again, paint it. Levinson, the former federal prosecutor, said the government needs to be careful not to cross a line to get into a trial over whether she was abused, to keep the case focused on whether, notwithstanding her personal life, she was still knowingly making false representations. Yeah, that's the proper way to go. Leach also questioned Holmes about whether she was involved in another romantic relationship during the time period between 2010 and 2015. Holmes, who lived with Bellani from 2005 to 2016, initially testified no. And in the apparent confusion over the dates, then she then confirmed she was in another in early 2010, but it was not actually a formal relationship. So she was fooling around on this Bellani guy in the time. So she was getting a boost from him and then sleeping around on him on the side. She had a side piece. The relevance of the question went unexplained by Leach. Right. But according to Cohen, it may be an attempt to show the ways in which Holmes appeared to have agency. What do you mean she appeared to have agency? She did have agency. If he was an abuser and controller, that wouldn't fit with her dating somebody else. Exactly. Exactly. She'd be too afraid to step out of. It is uncomfortable, but the prosecution really has to poke holes. I don't see any discomfort in asking this at all as prosecutor. They're basically saying, this is something, this woman's private life. It's what is it? Sanctified. You can't touch it. It's sacred. You can't do this. You should be uncomfortable. Okay. Yes, we'll stop there. And so when they said that, that just shows this woman is just a bold-faced liar. And of course, we'll end it here. And it's just another case. Like, again, the whole point of this video is to show that women will turn around and try and blame a guy when they've done something wrong. It happens every time. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.